one bites the dust. Ow!
Queen almost buried the song that would become their biggest hit, until Michael Jackson stepped in and changed music history with just one piece of advice. What was Michael's role and how did he save music history? When you think of Queen, what's the first sound that comes to mind? The operatic drama of Bohemian Rhapsody? Or maybe Brian May's soaring guitar in We Will Rock You? Or maybe, just maybe, Freddie Mercury's voice tearing through Somebody to Love? Well, for millions of people around the world, the first riff that comes to mind isn't a guitar line or a layered harmony, it's bass. The four notes, pulsing and hypnotic, the heartbeat of a song that became Queen's best-selling single of all time, Another One Bites the Dust. Now, what's really fascinating here is that this song almost didn't happen. It wasn't even supposed to be a single because some members of the band weren't even sure that it belonged on the album at all. And yet, one determined bassist, a reluctant drummer, and the king of pop's surprising advice went on to define a moment in music history. See, by the end of the 70s, Queen was already one of the biggest rock bands in the world. They had delivered hits that cemented their reputation for spectacle. Bohemian Rhapsody with its operatic layering, We Will Rock You with its stadium-stomping rhythm, and then We Are the Champions as an anthem for victory. They were masters of blending rock with drama, theatrics, and complexity. The simple fact is, Queen's sound was bold, it was multi-layered, and it was larger than life. So when bassist John Deacon started pushing a stripped-down, funky idea that sounded closer to disco than rock, it raised a couple eyebrows in the band. But then disco by 1980 was on the decline, and when a lot of critics and fans declared it dead, it wasn't really for rock and roll to try and rebound it. For a band like Queen, known for guitars and harmonies, releasing a dance floor-inspired track seemed kinda risky, maybe even career-threatening, and yet that's exactly the path that Queen stumbled into. But unknown to them, an experiment that felt uncertain within the band would soon change their trajectory forever. But before it became a global anthem, Another One Bites the Dust began as nothing more than a scribble in a notebook and a bass riff inspired by an unlikely source. But as bold as Deacon's vision was, not everybody in Queen saw potential in it. In fact, his bandmates were skeptical, even resistant. And if not for one famous fan who recognized the song's hidden power, Another One Bites the Dust might have remained an overlooked experiment rather than a global anthem. The thing about music is that every legendary song, it's got a starting point somewhere, right? For John Deacon, the seed of Another One Bites the Dust began in a really unexpected place: old American Western films. See, Deacon was the last member to join Queen, often described as the quiet one compared to Mercury's flamboyance or Taylor's fire. But when he spoke musically, he spoke with impact. He'd already written hits like You're My Best Friend and I Wanna Break Free, but in 1979, he started scribbling down phrases inspired by cowboy movies. Then one line just kept on circling in his head: Another One Bites the Dust. His earliest lyrics were filled with cowboy imagery and humor. The problem? Deacon thought that they were a little silly. He was even embarrassed to show the band his cowboy version of the song. But still, the phrase stuck with him, and so did the rhythm. Around the same time, Deacon had been hanging out with the funk band Chic, whose Good Times had one of the most infectious bass lines of the disco era. But that influence sparked a crazy idea. What if Queen, a rock band known for guitars and vocal layering, built a song around a stripped-down, disco-inspired groove? Well, that's exactly what he did. He began playing a simple thumping bass riff, catchy, hypnotic, that was impossible to ignore. And when it came time to record, he wanted the drum beat to be equally straightforward. Roger Taylor, the drummer, was asked to play a very basic loop, and its drums were covered in tape to mute the sound. Although Taylor hated the process, he later admitted, "I didn't really want to get into dance music. Wasn't my thing." To him, it sounded a little too funky, too stripped down, too far from the thunderous rock drums that he loved to play. Meanwhile, Freddie Mercury was captivated. He threw himself into the lyrics, which Deacon had now shifted away from cowboys and toward a street fight story about a man named Steve, and began singing with full force. Brian May later recalled that Mercury was relentless in the studio. Freddie absolutely adored it. He just stepped into it with a vengeance, and he sang it until he bled. He was forcing himself to get those high notes, and he loved it. Even so, the band as a whole wasn't sure what to make of it. No big guitar solos, no vocal layering, no typical Queen sound. For Roger Taylor, it was practically sacrilege. For Brian May, it was fun, but not necessarily essential Queen. Now, here's what you need to know. The funky experiment might not have made it onto their 19 album, The Game, at all. But then came an unexpected push. Michael Jackson, already a superstar, was a fan of the band. See, after attending a Queen concert in LA in 1980, he visited them backstage. His advice was simple and direct. You've got to release Another One Bites the Dust as a single. Initially, the band hadn't planned on doing that, and Taylor still thought it was a mistake. For May, he wasn't 100% sure, but Freddie and Deacon were convinced. And Jackson's confidence, honestly, was really hard to ignore, so they took the risk. Taking Jackson's advice turned out to be the tipping point, because once released, the song didn't just succeed, it shattered expectations and catapulted Queen to an entirely new level of fame. What followed was a story of charts, cultural impact, and a legacy that still resonates with people today. In August 1980, Another One Bites the Dust was released as a single. Almost instantly, it proved Michael Jackson right as the song shot to #1 in the US Billboard Hot 100, where it stayed for 3 weeks. More impressively, it lingered on the chart for a staggering 31 weeks, a sign of its crossover power. It wasn't just a rock hit or a disco hit, it was everybody's hit. It became Queen's biggest selling single of all time, moving millions of copies worldwide. It even earned the band a Grammy nomination. But what made it work so well? Well, part of it was the timing. By 1980, disco had officially died in the cultural conversation, but funk and groove-driven music were still irresistible on the dance floor. Another One Bites the Dust hit a sweet spot between rock and funk that appealed to nearly everybody. Brian May later reflected that the song wasn't his natural territory, but he added some dirty, distorted guitar to toughen it up a little bit. To that, he credited Michael Jackson with recognizing the track's crossover appeal and even suggested that Thriller was partly shaped by what Jackson heard in Queen's hit. Michael came to the same place from a different direction. I think his whole album, which followed, was deeply influenced by Another One Bites the Dust and the fact that it straddled funk and rock, May said. As for Queen, the success of the song was dizzying. We kind of became the biggest group in the world at that moment, May recalled. He went on to say, "You know, it's a fleeting moment because someone else will come and take over, but for that moment, we kind of owned the world." So who would have thought that the song that gave them that moment of global dominance was the very track that they doubted, resisted, and almost didn't release? If you found this video insightful, then let us know what you think in the comment section down below. While you're here, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you next time.